Hi everyone, welcome to a Data Vault Innovators Community Live Q&A. I am very lucky today to have with me two esteemed colleagues. One from sunny Germany, Michael, say hello.
Hi guys, it's not very sunny, but it's nice. Absolutely.
Can
Hi,
you,
thanks for
Michael,
having me.
can you give us a quick intro on who you are? Because some of this audience may not have seen you or had
Yep,
the chance to meet you yet.
yep. Yeah, my name is Olschimke. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Scalefree. We are running the DVA trainings all over Europe, essentially, across Europe for DVA, and we also do consulting engagements. So we help customers from all kinds of sizes with their data vault challenges and data-driven challenges, essentially. And we are headquartered in Hanover, Germany.
And I was lucky enough to come and visit you fairly recently.
Yep,
And
yep.
obviously, as with lots of our sessions, I have Nols Ebersohn. Nols, quick intro by you as well.
Hi everyone, Nols Ebersohn, Principal Architect at Ignition Data. As I mentioned before, feels like we're in an AA meeting. Hi, it's been X number of years since we last did a traditional data warehouse, but we're not biased in any way. But the bottom line is information management has been, in our experience in Fabric, for forever. So we're keen to take some of the questions that may come up and see if we can actually shed some light on it.
Yeah, excellent. And okay, then to the questions. So if you're watching this and you have a question, then please drop it into the chat on whatever forum you're watching this on YouTube or on the DVIC platform. And we've got some people monitoring that. So if we have time, we'll get to your question. If we don't have time today, then we will use your question in the next session. So we have a list of questions already. So I'm going to essentially read them out and then smile while you guys answer it. So first question, given Data Vault requires you to create joins amongst many objects, are there performance challenges when you're trying to get data out of the vault? And we'll start with Michael.
Okay, so that's a common, a critical point essentially. The first thing is, yes, in Data Vault you might have a lot of entities in the raw data vault, in the business vault, and I've seen installations with thousands of entities sometimes. So the data vaults can become quite large. On the other hand, if you follow the advice to build information marts, which are essentially tailored for the use case, where you don't build an information mart these days anymore with facts and 50, 60, 70 dimension references, essentially. You keep them small, essentially. Which means that your typical queries in your dimensional models will not query your 10,000s of entities. They will query a subset of those entities. That's number one. So the problem is much smaller than you think when you're looking at the data model, essentially. And the next thing is, yes, there will be performance problems on traditional databases. But those problems existed in the 90s already, and they have been solved by the inventor, Dan Linstead, back then already. And the trick is to use PRT tables and bridge tables. So what we see is in Data Vault, it's not the complexity, or it's not the number of joins which it presents an issue. It's really the complexity of joins. And PIT tables reduce the complexity from left outer joins with complex join condition down to an inner join with equi-join condition. And that's the fastest join on all the database I've seen and worked with, and that's a lot. It's the fastest join you can get away with. And then it doesn't matter if you have 10, 15, 20 joins, as long as they're inner joins and equi joins, essentially. Notes. That's my take on it, at least.
Okay, Nols, have you got anything to add?
There's a couple of things. There's always an underlying, isn't that new, strange? A couple of things. There's always an underlying question as to why that question comes up in conversation. And so the question comes up in conversation because many table joins are essentially a problem because it gets more and more complex, but it's hiding two different other aspects. It's usually coupled with a whole lot of additional business rules as well in the traditional join sense. That's the expectation. So they go, woe be us, how are we going to deal with so many tables, even more complex code? And so the architecture in Data Vault, because it actually deals with those particular problems at particular places in the architecture, it simplifies it. And so Business Vault deal with the derived product. So therefore the subsequent consumption is dramatically simplified because all of that complexity business rule complexity is out of that equation. Then going on to the actual information delivery, what Michael has said is absolutely spot on. You have use case specific, smaller information marts delivering on the speed, the agility, functionality as necessary without overloading it. So from that perspective, that question why people are concerned about the many table joins has that little sting in the tail. And if you are truthful from a historical perspective, if you built a classic or a third normal form or dimensional classic data warehouse, when you reach the enterprise level, you'll be doing as many or sometimes more table joins as you would do in Data Vault because of that enterprise reach. So we compare the simplicity of the initial stages of dimensional modeling or information marts to subsequent enterprise level elements. So that is recognized up front. The problem has been solved elegantly. And so those are my two cents worth of contribution on that question.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like that question comes up from people who used Data Vault a long time ago and are coming back to it, or they're someone who's new to it maybe, but gone deep into the archives of all the different posts online and forums and what have you, and because it was kind of a problem, I guess, way back, but it's been solved quite significantly.
Just as one comment, there's a reason why we have so many entities in Data Vault, and that's really because of the enterprise data, right? So in theory, the enterprise should only have one CRM system. There should be no dirty data in it. There should be no security, privacy should all be solved by the operation system. I'm overstretching a bit, but in the end, it's really because of so many CRM systems, because of dirty data. There's a solution Data Vault for everything, but everything that we have to solve, fixing data, cleansing data, deduplicating records, and so on, will add complexity, will add additional entities. And that's the reason for many entities in Data Vault. It's a solution, but it gets complexer the more complex the business problems are.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. All right, so we're going to move on to question 2. So one question in about 7 minutes. Not too bad, boys. All right, so in a scenario where we have data sets being shared by an external provider, can we use Data Vault to model over those data sets and ingest them into the data platform? And I think this is maybe a question around virtualization and being able to have virtualization out over those data sets. So, Nols, do you want to start with this one, and then we'll
Sure.
pass it to Michael?
Organizations that share information has to anchor that information still on some sort of identifiable entity or thing or event in some regard. So whether it is an external organization or internal to your organization, Data Vault still offers the same integration opportunity. And I think that's one of the key elements that we need to keep in mind here, is that even though the data may originate external to an organization, it still has to be integrated with the rest of the internal organizational data. And so the opportunity the Data Vault offers us to achieve that integration and do so without introducing unnecessary re-engineering is one of the secret elements of its success. And so the external data being brought in-house is always going to require some sort of homogenization or integration component with the rest of your internal data. So that opportunity must be available, and Data Vault affords us that opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. So from our perspective, having an external data set is not a big deal. We have this in most enterprise data systems these days, and it doesn't matter where the data comes from. Is it from internal source and external source? As long as you can identify the records, the business objects behind those records, right? So as you can identify them and you can integrate the data essentially. So I fully agree with Nols for this. I've not much to say, to be honest. It's a standard case.
So for my knowledge, then, to extend on this person's question, so if someone's using a Zetaris or a Denodo, like a data virtualization tool, do they then need to model that external set of tables if they don't want to ingest it into the vault? Do they do a virtual vault model over it? How does that work? No, Michael.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So two things here. You could essentially, what I would prefer is to ingest the external data into the raw data vault just as any other data source. On the other hand, we see this with some clients where they have, for example, legacy data vault systems or let's say components of the platform built by non-data vault standard means essentially. And what you can do is you can also integrate the information on information model level. So you might have a, let's say, fact NAD that's delivered somehow, right, via non-data vault means. It's there. It's a fact NAD in, let's say, in some database, and then you have some dimensions built using data vault means. As long as the keys, the dimension keys now, as long as the dimension keys match the facts essentially, then you could join these, and that's what you have to prepare essentially in your data vault part, that those keys match and the expected granularities match. But that would work as well. We do it occasionally, I would say.
Okay. Nols, anything to add?
There's two requirements that we also need to keep in mind, and the first one is an audit trail. So is it important to track when and how this information that's externally hosted and published, how it's changed, when it's changed, all those type of things, and it may not be delivered or a feature of your external data source as such. And in those cases, it is beneficial to bring that into your vault where the historization, the audit trails, all those elements are a natural feature of the patterns. And so you benefit from that audit trail component as well. The last element of that, particularly when it comes to virtualization platforms, and yes, they've come a long way, and yes, they are pretty cool, but they're only as cool as the underlying platform that they virtualize on top of. So if you have a platform that does not allow for sub-second response times because it's a sweep across a large data set every single time you access it, your performance sparkle may suffer if that is what you need. So can you integrate at information mart level if the keys exist and consistent, which is a big if? Maybe. Is there other elements, the decoupling in the architectural sense of the source system not being burdened with the analytical workload as well? And so sending an awful query to the source system, it dims the organizational lights. You'll be the most unpopular person in town. And so maybe that's the marching orders out of town. So there's all sorts of good reasons why the architecture allows you to separate those elements as such. So it's can you? Yes, but I can also jump off off cooling tower, and that's not necessarily a good idea. So can I? Yes. Should I? If I have a parachute, maybe. If not, perhaps not.
Okay. All right. That helps. And sorry for the sideline. Just Jules' learning question. But anyway, we'll move on. Next question. Which scenarios do the traditional data warehouse dimensional modeling structures prove to be more beneficial than Data Vault? The curly one. Michael, do you want to have a go at that?
I can jump in. So first of all, I might not be the best person to answer this, but let me try. So first of all, I was essentially starting my career in data warehousing, I initially at the academic level learned how to build database systems with dimensional models and traditional approaches essentially. But then I was lucky enough to get essentially exposed to Data Vault early on in my career. So I really built the big systems, the more complicated systems, all with Data Vault. So that's number one. On the other hand, I have a similar question like this often that I hear. When is Data Vault an overkill, or when should I not use Data Vault essentially? And it's quite simple. If your existing solution, if the dimensional model that you have, for example, if that has no pains, if you have no pain points with it, then you're good. Why would I use Data Vault? The problem is, and that's why organizations use Data Vault, is because they have pain points with these traditional approaches, which are often very much limited. And yes, you might get away with it initially quite fast. So you build some targets and you're done. But then when it's about changing those components, or when the requirements increase over time, then you will see the limitation of those solutions essentially. That's my quick take on it.
Okay, Nols, yeah.
That's an excellent summary of the problem.
Would you like a new question?
If you have no change in your organization, or you have full integration in your singular platform that you run, then a dimensional model will just work fine. So that I've seen that work for organizations with a single standalone system, and that's fine. That's easy. I've also seen it work for a very large hotel group, which has had many lines of business, many products, etc. But their fundamental strategy was they always integrate all the things that they acquire, all the businesses always get integrated into their one single platform. They see 3 or 4 columns a year of change in their dimensional data warehouse, and it works just fine. And so from that perspective, it ain't broke, as Michael has pointed, don't fix. If you have an integration problem and you have lots of systems and you have poor integration across them, then Data Vault's probably going to be a good call.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I think this next question is kind of a bit of an extension, I suspect, knowing as much as I know about Data Vault, which is about a quarter of what you two know. So do Power BI models consume Data Vault modeling, or is there another approach to DV that brings Power BI modeling? So Nols, do you want to start with that one?
Power BI modeling is all about enabling the tool to get the result you're after with the functionality and the speed that you're after. So the modeling there is essentially based on a particular use case. And if you try to build an all singing, all dancing kind of construct report, you invariably run into various constraints and walls, not just at a database level, but at a Power BI level as well. Be it as it may, nice and focused, concise for the purpose, for the particular element, whether that is a direct database connection, whether that is a cube, whether that is an API call, whatever the case mechanism is fit for purpose, that would be fine. So in Power BI's case, the database connection, they definitely have benefits from having point-in-time and bridge tables as the foundation for virtual information marts. And so they're essentially pointed at the information mart, and if it looks, feels, and smells from a database perspective like a dimensional model, Power BI loves it. Whether that's physically a fact or dimension remains immaterial. As long as the database provides the performance sparkle, you're home and host. It's a semantic layer on top of it to essentially facilitate your delivery.
Yeah. And Michael, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. So it's really about information delivery, and we typically don't use the Data Vault model, hub-sync satellites for information delivery. We typically use something like star schemas, dimensional models, flat and white structures, and so on. And so we have to derive the target model that for the information model. We have to derive that from the Data Vault. That's a challenge, and for that we need pit and bridge tables in many cases. There's one comment: don't forget also the storage mechanism of your underlying database. Because what I see is that in some scenarios when you have, let's say, large data volumes and a column-based storage, clients, they want to have dimensional models, star schemas, snowflake schemas with dimensions referring other dimensions, joins, and so on, right? Comes back to the initial questions a bit. So what we do is, let's say you have a Hadoop cluster and everything for your information mart, we really want to use Parquet files for column-based storage. In this case, we don't create star schemas, we just create flat and white structures. Pre-join everything, load this into the Parquet files, because that's easy to consume and fast, extremely fast. So think about your information model, align it with the underlying storage. That's my only take on it. Other than that, it's really about information delivery.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite often when we get this question that we take the time to explain that just because you're using Data Vault doesn't mean that you'll not have dimensional models or others supporting your BI tools. So whether it's Power BI or any of the other BI tools, we'll support all BI here. Okay, so let's find another question. Okay, should the raw vault act as the source of record history? And in a lakehouse model with a persisted staging layer storing source data history, could the Data Vault be reloaded from this persisted store if needed? And Michael, you can have a go at that to start with.
Not sure if I get the question right. So if you have a data lake and you have the raw data vault should be from a data vault modeling perspective, I would always make sure that the raw data vault is essentially auditable, it contains the data, and you can reconstruct every delivery from the raw data vault. The data lake is another opportunity to achieve that, to recreate every delivery from the source data set, from the source system. But I would have the, let's say, the expectation for the raw data vault as well. So yes, from a data vault perspective, the raw data vault is a single point of facts, we call it. But yes, also true, the data lake gives you another option. That's my quick take.
And I think what's being asked really is if you've got a persisted, staging area that persists all history, then can you build raw vault off that, and do you need to build raw vault off that? So.
Yeah, we do, because the problems in the persistent staging area, you still have the same problems as everywhere else. You have GDPR issues like personal data in it that you have to remove. You have to secure the data. You want to integrate data and so on, right? So you have multiple source systems that deliver data, and the raw data vault helps us to manage these data sets, to integrate them, to secure the data sets, to deal with personal data easily, much easier than in a data lake. So there might be cases, especially when you have to delete personal data, where we have to encrypt the data lake, for example, and then perform a logical delete on the data lake. And that might lead to cases where you have no consumer data anymore in the data lake, but you still have the reduced consumer data. Let's say the hair color or whatever of the consumer or the city where they came from. You still have that in a raw data vault, but not the first and last names anymore. So the reduced data is in a raw data vault, and everything else is gone from the data lake in some case.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's quite a topical question right now that like people are moving to data lakes and lake houses, but also still knowing that they need to create that layer where the data is integrated and prepared for you. Nols, did you have anything else to add to that?
Michael mentioned the secret code word for me, and that was integration. So persistent staging area does give me the facts in the time context, the first half of the data warehousing paradigm, but it fails to deliver integration. And as Bill has now, since 2018, amended the data warehouse definition by business key. So you need the integration by business key to bring that data together. Your persistent staging area fails on that count. So that functionality remains a challenge. The other granular components that Michael mentioned was fantastic. So the ability to curate the data to the point where it delivers on the functionality, the expectations, and the security, the governance components is an opportunity that is, if you're going to do that in a data lake sense, how are you going to do that? What model, what approach are you going to apply to the data that goes into your lake to achieve it? Well, what options do you have? And so from that perspective, Data Vault really steps in and fills that void as far as how do you organize all of this data to make it extensible and sustainable in the long term.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is all about integration, isn't it? And I feel like you might have peeked over my shoulder and seen these questions already, Nols, because the next question is specifically about business keys. So good job. So how do you know which business key to use? Which business key do we choose, or does Data Vault need mastering to have happened prior to ingestion into the vault? And you can keep talking, Nols, seeing how you brought up business keys.
So there's at least two questions folded in there into the single question. So let's deal with what is a business key first. So a business key is that thing that is unique, identifiable, and very importantly is used within your business processes to actually correlate the different steps within or between business processes to allow it to transition as such. Hence being a functionally orientated design in that it follows the function or the business process quite closely. So when we look at business keys, we always ask the three questions fundamentally. Is this business key or this value set domain unique at some point? Is it well described? Because if it's something, a thing or a something, there's always some descriptor around it. And then, do I find it used in the other business processes? And so this is why it's so important to have your subject matter experts involved so that you can understand what's the real business key as opposed to sometimes the natural business key. So in this particular forum here, our names and surnames makes it nice and unique. But is there another Michael Olschimke? I don't know. Is there another Nols Ebersohn?
He builds houses, actually.
And so we can see our natural business key, that what we expect to be identified with may not necessarily be what the systems or the business processes use because of the lack of uniqueness and all those challenges. So sometimes, whether we like it or not, sequence numbers, client number, product number, whatever the case may be, are used as the business keys, whether we like it or not. But we always ask that question, is there a good natural business key? Because we don't want to make it a system-specific approach, but we do want to recognize that they can come in different forms, whether they're sequences or whether they're natural business keys, they come in different forms. But those three questions help you to identify what really is a business process and, business key. And the business process qualification is one of the asset tests. Is it behaving like a business key? Because you can get the same answer on question 1 and 2 for reference data, right? Do I have a unique list of them somewhere? Are they well described? You can arguably yes. But are they fundamental to the interchange of the business process or steps within the business process to tie it all together? And no, they're just a qualifier or a classifier of information. So they're descriptive in nature. So that just helps you to identify that element. The second part of that key question, and you'll have to remind me the second part of the question. I just remember there's 2 parts.
So they were asking, so which business key do we choose, or does Data Vault need mastering to have happened prior to ingestion into the vault?
The mastering of business keys. In the ideal world, as Michael's alluded before, you'll have a single system that manages this and it's fine. You'll have a single business process that manages, because the mathematics of it's simple. If you have to pay for 2 versions of the same data being captured, is trying to pay twice for the same hamburger. And so it's never as efficient as just paying once. Let's just call that as it is. Now, what if these business keys do not get mastered centrally? What happens if you don't have a central mastering component? We still capture and recognize in Data Vault all the business keys, irrespective of whether they are mastered in a single spot or not. There's techniques that we use to help deal with the enterprise uniqueness challenges that may come along in Data Vault. Different slight topic there. But as far as the relationship that may then be derived or given within whichever platforms you have, you can capture that as just another relationship. So the Data Vault naturally allows you to deal with the fact that you don't have mastering always under wraps. And so from that perspective, we'll adapt and still capture that insight as to these 2 keys are in fact the same thing in a relationship. So it allows you the flexibility to deal with the fact that mastering may be absent or broken or fractured between the different source systems, and still allow you to bring all of that in. Then again, if you apply some business rules or some sort of matching, you can go and deduplicate them, and you can store those as additional insights in your business vault. And so you have best of both worlds. You have both the conformed or the cleansed and the raw, so you can meet audit requirements just for allows.
Excellent. Michael, you probably don't have anything to add up for all of that, but let's go.
Okay, we're good on timing, right? So
we're good for time. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the thing is, we actually, so I fully agree with Nols. The only thing I want to add is we have added a process essentially to this topic. If this would be the first meeting with a client, I would essentially ask you what's your business model? Because my goal would be to create in the first meeting a conceptual model, a taxonomy with your business objects. So you start talking about community members, you start talking about forums, vendors, and so on. All these business objects I draw up on a whiteboard. I would talk about relationships, so community members join forums and so on. Those relationships are not that very important. It just adds readability to the model, essentially. But I'm really interested in the business objects. And then in the next meeting or in a subsequent topic, I would ask you, so you talk about forum members. How do you identify these forum members? How do you identify forums? How do you identify community members, vendors, and so on? How do you identify these? And if you have different people in the room from different departments, guess what? They're all using different source systems and you get different answers. And they have also different processes. And I'm not judging those answers. I'm just adding them to the business objects. So let's say marketing says we are identifying community members by email address. Then production says, I know that doesn't work because they're not unique, they're per household. So we have a login name and so on, right? So I'm just adding them to the business object. And then when I have to ingest data from a particular source system, I typically know what's inside the source file. I know its contacts or leads and so on, right? I know that at least. So easily. And then I'm looking for these business key candidates from the conceptual model. I'm trying to find the email address I talked about, the username or whatever. I'm trying to find them in my data set. And if I can find them, I would then check if they meet some requirements. And Nols talked about all of them already. I just want to add that the uniqueness is the most important one, in my opinion. The uniqueness of the business key in 2 dimensions. One is what Nols said is about the domain. The business key must be unique across the whole enterprise, uniquely identifying one contact only, right? And then also, because we're building data vault systems where we historize data, also about time. So it should be unique over time. And those dimensions, as long as the key meets those dimensions, it's a good candidate that we can work with. And then I agree with Nols, from those business keys, let's say 2 or 3 of these candidates survive from the contextual model. They're in this data set. They're unique across time, across the enterprise. I would choose the one which is the natural key typically. First of all, I would choose the one which is used in as many source systems as possible. So if I have 2 keys, but one is used in more source systems, I'm going for this one. Because the key that is available in many source systems integrates all this data. So it integrates more data, essentially. And if I have 2 keys which are essentially having the same number of source data sets, right? Or is available in the same number of source data sets, I'm going for a natural key. Because the assumption is that you like your CM system at the moment, but in 30 years from now, they're going to replace this. You don't know about it. You don't talk about it. It's not a concern of you. But in 30 years, they're going to replace the CM system of today. There is a chance that there will be a requirement, a software requirement for the next upcoming CM system that says, we use this particular business key, the username, for the last 30 years. We want to keep using that in the next system. So the natural key has a chance of integrating even more data, future data sets. That's why we prefer the natural key. That's a quick reasoning essentially here. So yeah, we start with conceptual model and turn it into business keys.
I like it.
Right,
and yeah, I really like the approach of doing a conceptual model to start with. Makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think we've probably got time for one more quick question. Okay, what are the advantages of Data Vault versus doing a reloadable data mart off a persisted staging layer using a tool like DVT, for instance? Mm-hmm. And you can keep talking, Michael, why not?
Okay, so comes back a bit to the question that we had before. In the end, we have customers where they also approach or try to approach the problem of data warehousing with just loading from a data lake and then creating results from it, essentially. And it's always quick, much quicker in some cases than Data Vault approaches. But Data Vault adds the management to the data warehouse here. So it's all about managing data for, as I said, for privacy levels, for example, reducing data sets and so on. Because that would be my question. If you look at your enterprise requirements, and there are some organizational requirements, legal requirements, and so on, how do you solve all these issues? It might work for your case right now, but what about when the first consumer complains and wants to be forgotten, essentially, from your data set? You have to remove these records. What if you have dirty data in your data set? What if you add another data source in 2 years from now and you want to integrate this data source into your so far simple solution? Then sooner or later, you will hit those limits of your simple solution. That's my quick answer. So it might work, yes. If it works, fine, I'm good. But typically, it doesn't work.
No, it typically gets very messy. Nols, did you have anything to add to that?
I'm just going to be on the same refrain. My apologies. What about those pesky business rules? The more you embed them into the information marts, the more dependencies you have for downstream information marts that have to point to the original information mart. And if you make a change to the original information mart, you have to regression test and cascade that change throughout everything. And so very quickly you go from, we delivered this in 2 weeks to we're now delivering a small change in 3 months. That's the classic progression that we observe quite frequently of the challenges, as Michael has pointed out, as to what a tightly coupled architecture forces upon you. Because the tightly coupled, you have a single data mart that's trying to do the information delivery, the business rule outcomes, the complexity, the historization, all of that being smashed into one single structure, and poor thing can't cope because all data is mail. It can only do one thing at a time, and any reason of efficiency. And so from that perspective, it can either be excellent at remembering things, the data vault, or it can be excellent in delivering things, the information mart. And so it can't be both. That's unfortunately just the laws of nature as it pertains to information management.
I think spaghetti's delicious, but you don't want it in your data integration, do you? So, all right, we're out of time. If you're watching today and you had some questions we didn't get to, then apologies about that. If you have any that occur to you over the next couple of days while you're thinking about how wonderful this session was, then please jump on the forums in the community and drop a note, because we'll be doing these more regularly now. And we'll be getting our friends in Europe engaged. So, Michael, thanks so much for getting on board. Really appreciate it.
Yep.
And Nols, thanks for your time as well. And for now, thanks for watching. Please engage, get on the community or interact through YouTube and LinkedIn as well. And we'll see you next time.
Cool. We're reading it. Thanks.
Have a great day.